Okay. All right, this is the Special Hobbies 1/32 scale P-39D2. And unlike the Tamiya kit that Alan had, this thing's a nightmare. I don't know if you guys ever built special hobby kits. They're a challenge to say the least. The subject, of course, is a P-39 that was stationed in New Guinea, which is probably the most horrendous place for an airplane to sit on a ramp between the monsoon seasons and the sun baking the paint. I wanted to wear the living hell out of this airplane to make it look as worn as possible. And in the process, I came up with two new techniques that I tried. They just came into my head and I tried them, and they worked beautifully for fading the paint. The OD green is actually only one shade of OD green, but what I did here was, after sanding the model to give it a slightly soft grit feel to the aluminum, or plastic in this case, of course, I then painted the whole model in the OD green and neutral gray as if it came out of the factory. Then I used this type of a tight weave foam, which you can get with any electronics box, whenever you buy anything like this. I normally use a very soft foam for dappling the paint because, for those that don't know, I don't use an airbrush. And so this, soaked with thinner, I did a nice wipe down on the paint, and you can actually see the magic come before your eyes, and the paint fades. And it works on any shade of green, any shade of brown. Grays are a little bit more difficult. So that's how I got this weathered effect, or I should say this faded effect. The light exhaust staining, by light I mean light shade of exhaust staining on the side of the fuselage, I used a Q-tip, and the paint color is the old Testors 15 cent, or the old half-ounce or quarter-ounce bottles.
Yeah,
Square
15
bottles.
cents. You're talking about the really old.
The really old days, yeah. They're about $3 now.
Got a bunch left.
Yeah, they're 10.
Ones.
They're colored 10. I don't know the number of it. I can't remember what it was. Does a really good look for the 80 octane gas that they used in the South Pacific, and gives you that stain effect. Anyway, I used a dry brushing technique by constantly rubbing back, always going back, giving it a few seconds for the paint to start drying, hitting it again, and after 2 or 3 applications, I got this result. Okay, so that's something you guys want to try, because you have full control of where you're going to exhaust stain. It'll also work well on the gun exhaust. I didn't use that technique on the gun. I used my old tried and true, those old Testors brushes with the white handles that everybody throws away. They're the best thing in the world for doing gun staining. You cut the bristles back to where all you have is about 1/8 of bristle, 1/8 inch long, and you use that as a dry brushing technique, and it works beautiful for gun exhaust. Okay, the paints are all Model Masters enamel, because again, I don't use acrylics. Some of the problems the model had, this gentleman here did a pretty good review on the model, but I think he's being very, very nice, because he only talks about the gap in the wing. That takes a lot of filling to do. If you try to soften the plastic on the bottom of the wing and bend it up so that the wings will meet, you'll get a dihedral of an angle about that sharp, so that didn't work. So what I wound up doing there was I took plastic sprue, sanded it down by hand to where I had a piece of stretch sprue that was about the length of the wing root, pressed it down into the gap with some regular Testors model glue, let it soak, and then I filled the rest of the cavity using Testors model glue. The reason for that is that when you actually put a large airplane model together, and by large I mean 32nd and larger, once you put the landing gear in, after you've done all that work in the wing root area, if you don't do it carefully, the putty will crack, and then you'll have problems with joints that are that large. If it's a small seam like down the middle of the fuselage, which I had a problem with here, I used putty. I used a lot of putty on this model. But the wing root area, I used the old plastic tubular glue, because that stuff, even after it dries, it still expands and contracts. So no matter how heavy the model sits, those joints will stay solid and true. So that's another little technique you guys might want to try when you get large gaps.
It also has styrene in it.
Huh?
It also has styrene in it.
Well, yes, exactly. Yes.
Right.
So it reacts well with the plastic. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that. Special Hobbies, Azure, Special Hobbies, and I can never remember the third one, were those Czechoslovakian companies. I think it's HPH. They use a type of styrene that is very, very soft, that doesn't require a lot of effort to sand smooth or to get a gap out when you're sanding putty. It reacts very well with model glue. It works really well with the liquid glue. You remember the old square bottle liquid glue that comes with a brush? It works very well with that if you like using that. It does not like super glue. Super glue will have a reaction. If you're going to use it, use super glue on it. Use very, very sparingly, very lightly, because it'll eat into the plastic.
Okay, so what was the first glue you said they use is like a tester?
The tester's tube glue. Yeah, the
Okay.
styrene glue.
Orange and white tube. Stone
The old-
and high tube glue.
I use that more than any other glue. I find it's really nice. You can use it as a filler, believe it or not, because all you've got to do is run a bead of it along a fuselage seam, wet the end of your finger, and then rub it down. The glue will not stick to your finger if it's wet, and it'll actually fall into the recesses, and it'll also contour over the top of the fuselage to where you just go back with 300-400 grit, lightly sanded, either in the direction of which way you applied it or back and forth, and it works just fine. I find it better than using putty in some cases. And it's nice. For heavier joints, I prefer using that because, like I said, it allows for flexibility. Okay? I noticed that on Alan's model, he uses, what's the name of that stuff you use for your antenna wires?
That polymer stuff, Easy
Line.
Easy Line. After seeing that really fabulous job he did on that Corsair, I find that half my models, my wires are too thick. So between last week we had the meeting at my house and now that's all I've been doing. I've been breaking antenna wires off all my models and making thinner sprue. And I haven't got caught up to this one yet. I still like stretching sprue and making antenna wires out of sprue, even though it's very, very brittle. Okay, the kit is out of the box.
Really?
The thicker one you've got.
No.
Yeah, mine's just too thin.
The kit is right out of the box. I didn't add any detail to it. I didn't scratch build anything in this kit because it was frustrating enough getting the kit parts to fit. All of the flight controls are separate except the flaps, so I left the flaps up. The gun barrels are humongously too large. These are supposed to be 30 caliber machine guns inside of blast tubes, and even the blast tubes are way too large. The 50 caliber machine guns are okay. That's supposed to be a 20 millimeter cannon, which is way too large. They redid this kit as a P400, and they addressed that issue. The barrels are much smaller on that one, and I have that one at home too. I have got about between 50 and 60 hours on this kit, and I don't recommend it. The only advantage it has really is the fact that it's the only one at the time until Kitty Hawk came out with theirs, an early model of a P-39. Most of you guys probably build in 48 scale, and the Monogram old 48 scale model is a lot better than this as far as fit, finish, and detail. I have 3 more of these in different sizes, and I now know what I have to do to make the model better. But anyway, that's pretty much it. Has anybody got any questions?
How many hours? Oh, you.
Between 50 and 60 on this one, yeah.
Would you use fishing line for the antenna? Or?
No, that's clear stretch sprue.
Oh, clear. Okay.
Yeah, I find that clear stretch sprue looks more natural
Okay.
to look like a radio wire. If you use stretch sprue and you paint it, unless you use a very, very, very thin, dull aluminum color, which you hardly can get in enamel anyway, you're going to build up an area around that antenna wire to where it'll be way too thick. And even this one came out too thick, so.
Have you tried using the colored marker pens from like Hobby Lobby?
Oh,
or
yeah,
something?
yeah, I've used them, yeah.
'Cause that works really well
Yeah,
for
yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. The problem you have when using stretch sprue is that if you paint the wire first and then glue it into place, you're going to have problems with the glue joints.
Right.
Okay? If you put it on and then try to paint it, you've got to be very, very careful because it's very brittle. It'll break.
Right.
So that's why I used the enamel paint that I have. I have a bottle of Model Masters made a series of paints, all the metal colors.
Metallizers.
Metallizers. I was using that, and that seemed to work well. Unfortunately, it just dried too bright. It's too shiny.
Right.
And if you look at antenna wire is very dull, even to start.